Okay. I want to say welcome to everyone here who's here on the call. I am Barbara Bullock. I am the chair of the Professional Wellbeing Committee, and we have a responsibility for all of the communities of practice across ACPE. So again, I just want to say thank you. I'm going to let the national team introduce themselves if you are not familiar with their faces.
Hi, I'm Terry Izagari. I've been with ACPE for 25 years and been working very closely with the Professional Wellbeing Committee to help us establish this world of communities of practice and how our funding shall happen. So I look forward to being able to help each of you as we go through questions and answers.
And I'm Tiffany Kindred. I'm the Communications and Meeting Specialist. I've been with ACPE since 2017, and I work closely with COP coordinators on getting their events set up in our registration portal, and also I work closely with Terry and the events and meeting book logistics.
Okay, well, the format here is pretty straightforward. We are just here available to anyone who comes in on the call to see if there's questions that you might have, or to give you at least some idea of how to work with your community of practice if you have any questions. We do want to reference the fact that the national team and the committee has created guidelines, and that manual is available on the website if you are interested in doing something like funding your community of practice. There are guidelines out there for you to review. We are happy to try to answer any questions that you might have about that. Terry Izagari really does work as our primary point person on anything to do with the finances or how those are tracked or how to get a refund if you spent money. But that we are in that window right now for funding. The deadline for that is July 31st. So we are coming up quickly on the deadline if you are looking to do any funding requests for your community of practice. And with that, I will open it up if there's anyone who has a question. I think we have one participant who is not one of us, one of the people who are the panelists of this meeting. Tiffany, can you explain how to ask a question if somebody might have a question?
Sure. So if you have a question, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You can type it directly in there, and we will read it once it comes across the screen.
I think you have to hover your mouse at the bottom of your screen to see that.
Terry, did you want to maybe go over some of the funding guidelines that are new for this
Sure.
year?
If y'all would like to hear about some of the criteria and kind of how that process works, as Barbara referenced, the application is online at this point. You either have to already be registered as a COP and be recognized by the committee, or you need to be turning in your application to be recognized as a COP at the same time as your funding request. Some of the criteria, it's probably helpful to say our criteria is still growing and being established. But first, we as a committee have chosen to learn more about what our COPs want and need. So based on what we saw come in last year and what our budget is that's available, the criteria we know right now is that we're not able to fund events that are primarily designed for level 1 or 2 students, such as your summer CPE days or seminary recruitment. We also are not funding travel to or from a COP event, whether it be air, ground, or other. It's just not something that we can afford to accommodate for the numbers that are attending our various events. We've set a maximum on lodging. It's important to note that's $80 per night per person for the nights that you are hosting your event. I also would like to note there that in some situations, particularly around retreat centers, your lodging price that's quoted by the center may include your meals. So when you fill out the budget request form, it's very important that you make note for us to know this, that that lodging price does include your meals in order for us to recognize and be able to consider that additional funding.
Terry, a question on that. Does that normally happen at like a retreat center?
It's primarily at retreat centers that you'll find that. Most hotels, meals are not included and lodging is strictly for the guest room. But it is very common that at a retreat center, you get one price that does include your guest room and your meals. Again, we're not saying that you are not qualified to get the meals. What we're asking is that you help us to know that that price includes it so that we can consider the entire package. Also, for any meals that are outside of this or in your catering prices, we do consider kind of the average norm for ACPE. $15 is breakfast, $20 for lunch, and $40 for your dinners. Also, very important, the honorary that we have determined is limited at $1,500 plus $500 for your speakers per event. That's $500 for their travel and $1,500 for their honorarium. We do limit this because the caliber of speakers that we find that offer a good feedback to our members is around that $1,500. We keep it in line with what we do for our major events, and we ask that you stick within that. Those are the main things that we've established as criteria, and that's not to say that that might not change or grow. Whenever you fill out a funding application, at least at this point, please give us what you think you would like to do or your great ideas and let us consider them. That's not to say we can fund them, but let us consider if we can. Each year we're finding the applications are different, the needs are different. So in order to establish solid criteria, we need to know what the people want and need out in the field.
On occasion, we have gotten, some wonderful opportunity with a nationally or internationally known speaker that a community of practice may have wanted to bring in, and they were certainly willing to, make this open to everyone. When it gets to that kind of level, the committee feels that it is starting to go beyond the scope of a community of practice, and that it needs to organizationally go into something more of and the annual conference planning, or that it needs to be more on a national staff level. So if you're getting a speaker who is definitely going to require something more than a $1,500 stipend plus $500, and it's not just travel, it's travel and lodging, as I recall, Terry, on the speakers support, it's travel and lodging.
Right.
So $2,000 for a speaker, travel, lodging, and honorarium altogether. But when we get larger with somebody who's at a caliber that is going to be much greater than that as far as their speakers fees or something like that, then we are going to be looking to the national or an annual conference budget rather than the community of practice budget. And that has happened with groups like REM and other groups where it's such a national draw. That's a conversation then that we're starting to develop, is when does it really need to become more of a national organizational meeting rather than be housed in the very small budget of professional, well, not small, but there's a lot of people who want that money.
Barbara, can you talk about the Professional Wellbeing Committee, their role and how they can support communities of practice?
Thanks. Sure, Tiffany. The Professional Wellbeing Committee, we are, initially as we're getting started, our charge is to not only look to support communities of practice, but also to be looking at organizational and professional well-being. And honestly, as we've gotten started, the need to fund the communities of practice and get them launched, and we still feel like we're in a startup phase on that work. But we are increasingly trying to get our attention to efforts around well-being. Part of the well-being that we spent a lot of time talking about at the previous annual conference was how do we include and have a real vital space for the history and wisdom of our emeritus and our folks who are now retired supervisors or but are actively supervising as contract supervisors, and that do need a community of practice and are contributing in communities of practice. So, you know, what can we do to make sure that we don't lose all the experience and wisdom of those folks? We're also really interested in how do we widen the scope with folks who are that we've traditionally called clinical members. You know, how do we make sure that they really can have a vital voice, contribute to ACP? Because these are people who love ACPE. They don't want to become certified educators, but they certainly want to participate in the education programs and the mission of ACPE. And we want to make sure that they feel welcome and that they feel that their contribution is really helping to steer the organization in its mission. So we are also interested in things like international groups. We're also very interested as a group of how do we take the learning and the innovation that is coming from the communities of practice and make sure that it goes beyond the communities of practice, and so that the whole organization can benefit. One of the ways we've been trying to do that is through the annual meetings to make sure that we have an open forum, trying to encourage communities of practice, perhaps that, you know, that they set as a goal for a community of practice to offer some sort of conference or workshop at the annual conference, so that, you know, whatever you're learning and whatever way you want to contribute to the practice of supervision, that we all get to benefit from that. So we're finding that maybe we're going to need to find ways to have a rolling process across the country. We have no idea what that might look like, but maybe we need to develop something on a series of educational events across the country, and what would that look like, and how would the organization have to support us? So that might look like what we call some sort of chapter meeting. But it would be really just focusing on getting a whole bunch of theory groups and, you know, local CEC consortium groups together to really make sure the national organization benefits from communities of practice. So that's really where we're headed. That's really our goals going forward as a team. I've said many times, you know, the professional well-being, we really need to make sure that we get a chance to work on the well-being part of our call. To that end, all the communities of practices, the groups have now been assigned a professional well-being committee member to act as a liaison. And I hope that in the next couple of weeks that you receive some sort of contact, email or phone from a committee member. So that if you have questions or you just want to share how well things are going, we'd like to hear what's working well too, and to help us in our practice. But the committee members will be trying to reach out to members of the national membership in their communities of practice.
Looks like we just had someone else join the webinar. So just a reminder that if the floor is open for questions, if you hover over your screen, there is a Q&A box that you can type your questions into there. And while we wait, I guess, Terry, this might be a good time for us to talk about maybe some of the office support that we can offer to.
Certainly. Tiffany and I team up to address all of the logistical needs as we possibly can for all of our COPs. We're not able to do things quickly and on the fly, so we do ask that we get advance notice when you have needs. We're here to do anything from sourcing, finding you a location, to doing the contracts. It is important that the contracts, all contracts, come through the national office, not only for your venue, but also for your speakers or any catering cost. Any kind of a contract agreement requires a signature through the national office. We also will do the registration for you. We actually prefer to do the registration for you. It allows us to know who's involved and what activities are happening out there in the field. That can be something that you start by doing a template or a rough draft of a registration form. You send it to Tiffany and I, and then we help you morph that into a full online registration process. When it comes to a hotel. Most often folks will be calling in on their own for registration or for reservations, and we will tell you and give you that information online with a web page how to do that. If it's a retreat center, we need to know that we're working with usually a rooming list, and Tiffany and I have a way to help you navigate that as well. But anything, badges, again, the on-site logistics, we're happy to support you as we can. We just need to know what your needs are.
We have a question from Michelle Overwise-Laycock. How much advance notice do you need?
Usually from the point that you start your registration to the event, for a size of a normal COP, an average COP, you want at least 2 months. So back it up another at least month for us to start sourcing and setting up. We just, again, we're happy to support, but we can't do it necessarily on the fly. So figure whatever your COP event is, you want to be in touch with us at least 3 months in advance.
And also to add to Terry's point, it's important to note too that a lot of our groups don't meet face-to-face. It actually is a very small number of groups who are meeting face-to-face, and most groups prefer to meet online via Zoom. And so we do have a virtual meeting request form located on our website under the Communities of Practice tab, where you could go there, complete that form. We do ask for 24 hours in advance, and we do schedule meetings for 3 hours maximum time. And so that has also been a very useful tool for communities of practice who don't necessarily want to spend the money to meet face-to-face, but want to meet on a regular basis. And so they have been utilizing the Zoom platform a lot.
And Terry, Tiffany, that is no cost to the community of practice. Is that correct?
Correct.
Included with membership.
Yep. And just to add to that, I mean, our services are also included with, there's no extra charge for that. When we help you with registration, the logistics, the sourcing, et cetera, that's not a cost to the COPs. That's what we're here for. If we do have supplies, like, if we're going to make badges and things, there will be a supply cost included, but not for the services.
And we also are developing online communities using Yammer. So a lot of our members are kind of already using SharePoint in their centers, and so we are now transitioning to use SharePoint here amongst the ACPE membership. Unfortunately, Carl couldn't join us on the call today, but if you do have any questions about how to get set up on SharePoint or on Yammer, Carl is the person that you would speak with, and he's always happy to help one-on-one over the phone to get you set up if you're having issues there.
I know one of the things that I did to try to be a little bit more proficient myself on Yammer and, what is a group and what's a team, I actually just went on YouTube. There's a lot of information out there. There's lots and lots of YouTube videos. So I really encourage teams. The nice thing about Yammer is you can have it on your phone. What I like about it is it will push responses to me. So I can go out there, and it can also be a place where you can save a lot of documents for your group if you want to. So you can save the agenda or any kind of PowerPoints or anything else that you might want to have as a document warehouse for your community of practice. It's some wonderful tools, and it's much better, much more flexible than I think the original Start webpage, which had a lot of security things that we had to work through. This new platform gives the convener and the membership a lot more flexibility.
So we have another question from Michelle. She asks, for funding, what activities are allowed?
That's a big question, Michelle. We do have guidelines that are in the handbook online. We do allow for speakers. What I can say is some of the things we know we will not fund, but the creativity of the communities of practice are always interesting, and we're trying not to micromanage too much the creativity of the communities of practice. And so What I can say for sure is we will not fund CPE days, both the kinds where you're going for recruitment purposes to a seminary, for instance. Neither will we fund the kind of summer internship CPE days that we feel that that's a function, a curriculum of the center. And at some point that we have to just kind of draw a line but we've felt that feels more like a curriculum event of an individual center rather than the community of practice, even though we know they often come within communities of practice. But we found that financially, we just did not have the bandwidth to include things like a CPE day, which we feel is curriculum.
Just to kind of add to that, not so much around the funding, but some of the COP events have put in their planning that they would do perhaps canoeing, some of those kind of things. And certainly, while you are welcome to have that as an optional activity that folks assume for themselves and pay for themselves, it's important to note that there's liability on ACPE as an organization and on the planners, actually, when we sign off on that. So we do try to ask you to limit those activities. Again, not saying you can't do them. It has to be something that is optional. It's great when it's in the environment, but it's not something that we should formally offer.
The committee itself looks very closely at the domain and the practice. And so if we feel that the request is not really addressing the domain of knowledge, which we consider CPE supervision, that's how we look at it. How is this moving forward the supervision practice? And it's not all education, it's clinical pastoral education. And so we try to draw kind of a tight line around that. That's why we find we've had DMIN groups that are wanting to get funding for their cohorts because they're CPE supervisors in it. And we strongly support all those kind of hybrid DMIN programs, although we do not feel like we are at a point where this organization can fund a DMIN program, which is a curriculum event of the seminary, not ACPE. Did you answer the question, Tiffany, around where to find the book, the guidelines in the handbook?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Barbara, while we wait for the next question to come in, I know you touched on it briefly earlier on in the webinar, but can you talk about some of the ongoing support that's being developed, like the liaisons, and also just how a COP would report their annual activities through kind of the annual reporting structure that we're developing?
I think the key word right there, Tiffany, is developing. You know, I am so grateful for the work and the energies of the communities of practice. I know that we've had, you know, some stumbles kind of getting forward because we are building this from the absolute, you know, scratch. But I've been excited. You know, we have, I think the last count, I just looked at it last night, 73 COPs across the country, which to me is just a tremendous, and they are a broad spectrum of not only just, you know, local gatherings of what I call a CEC consortium kind of group, a consultation group, but they are also things like our most recent registration was for Bowen theory, family systems theory, that somebody wants to dedicate a group to just look at how that works in supervision and developing curriculum materials for that. So, you know, it's a broad spectrum of work across the country, and it's very exciting. We, as I said before, the committee each member has been assigned to different COPs across the country. They would also be good ones to reach out to. They're going to try to reach out to the communities of practice. And maybe we need to publish their names too, Terry or Tiffany, so that people know who their contact member is. But that's also so that if you have questions about the funding, and as we go through this funding cycle, and as we go through, as we as a committee are looking at your requests, that is the person who's probably going to reach out to you and talk to you and say, tell me about your community of practice, tell me about this event, make sure that they fully are informed and understand what it is you're trying to do and why you're asking for those funds. And then they will present your request to the wider committee for a vote. And so those committee members are really important liaisons to make sure there's good communication. And also the directors of the community, DCPMs. That's what they are. I can't always remember that long times, but the ACPE directors for the community are also assigned to each of the COPs. So you've got two contacts, one on the committee, one on the national level, and of course these two lovely ladies sitting right there, who are able to kind of work with you if you have questions around funding or just general questions looking for resources or just trying to get some ideas. We've had some groups who had great ideas but are having trouble actually launching or getting interest, or how do I have this idea but I can't seem to get people to join me on my Zoom calls. So those are all things that we will work with you on to try to help you figure it out. Also, we really encourage all the communities of practice to try to link up with other existing meetings. So if you know that there's going to be kind of a statewide group of some kind meeting near you and you've got a theory group, that's the perfect time to go to that coordinator of that other COP and say, I'd like to have this also work. This group, could we also be in on this with you and kind of have your group maybe try to do a face-to-face or be a part of that other group? But you could kind of join up together and see what you can do. Collaboration is what CPE does very, very well. So looking for ways to collaborate. The liaisons and the directors might know about those events, Terry as well, what might be actually happening that you could join in with. So we might have some ideas to help you. Tiffany, am I checking all the boxes?
Yeah. I'm trying to think of also the people who we're recording this. I want to think of folks who aren't on the call today. And so I do have a question for both you and Terry, just hypothetically. Say I want to create my own COP, I want to register a new COP, but it's outside of the funding deadline of July 31st. How would that work in terms of wanting to create a new COP, but also being outside of those funding guidelines?
We have folks who are creating communities of practice throughout the year. I cannot guarantee that outside of the funding deadline for this year that we will be able to support a group. So, if you don't have a group up and running until September, if you register in September, by then it'll be past this year's budget, but you could look forward to the next year. So we really do have a, budget fiscal responsibility to the membership, the national membership, to make sure that we are spending ACPE's funds wisely and with prudence. And so we do have deadlines that our committee has to meet in order to help ACPE make their budget. However, if, we could try to find a way, there's always like the foundation, or if we find out somebody's not going to spend their money, we're allowing ourselves to be flexible. Or if we say maybe what you do is join in on the annual conference this year and next year, there's ways that we might be able to work with you, or like I said, you might be able to reach out to a neighbor group that's meeting and meet tangentially with them, and we might be able to do something. So, but the funding deadline is July 31st. That's the deadline. I really hope people get it done by then. But, we have a tight turnaround for thoughtful deliberation on 73 COPs in the next couple months. My guess is less than half of them will actually ask for funding. So that's good for us. But the ones who are asking for funding, we estimate initially the funding requests that came in the past 2 years, the initial requests were over $400,000, and our budget is half of that. So we have to make some really serious decisions about how to spend wisely the funds that ACBE has entrusted us to do, of course, across the organization.
If I can elaborate a little bit, Barbara, on your commenting about the creativity and how we try to find other solutions. One example would be the Latinx DOP. They do prefer meeting face-to-face. They did meet one time face-to-face and just found such great value in that. But last year it wasn't feasible to ask for more funding, from their own decision. And so they talked to us, and knowing that one of our speakers at the annual conference was Dr. Miguel, they asked that he join their COP for a luncheon at the conference. So they had private audience and discussion with Miguel, which fed their COP beautifully, but yet it didn't cost them anything above and beyond a quick meal because he was there already as a speaker for the conference. So again, even if your idea is totally outside of the funding, please don't feel like we're trying to prevent you from using your creativity. That's what we're here for. Let's work together and find a way, if at all possible, that feeds what it is that you need.
They might not have ever guessed they could do that. It sounds like you have even a better solution.
And I know you mentioned on the last webinar, Terry, too, that spring is not the only option,
right?
For joining a meeting with us. We also do host a fall meeting here.
Yeah. Every November, end of October, early November, here in Atlanta, the leadership gathers, and so that's also a great time that we can usually add on some rooms and meeting spaces without extra cost.
Do we have any more questions from the floor or anything you ladies want to add?
Not that I can think of. I will say about the funding, I'm sorry. If you think that you have submitted your funding but you haven't gotten any kind of confirmation back from us, do please reach out. Shoot me a quick email, just say, hey, did you get my funding request? We want to make sure that everyone that has requested funding is in the mix to be considered. So if you haven't seen a confirmation, do be sure you send a note to me just to make sure it's received.
I think along just kind of a practical thing there as well, there has been some question of how to communicate. One will be, if you need to, you can always send an email to either Tiffany or Terry. They will know how to route any questions that you might have to the committee properly. You can always shoot an email to me. The other way to do it will be with your liaison, or if you have a question, you can send it to your director. So there's several different ways to make sure that you have your questions answered. The other thing I would say is that the committee currently is meeting by Zoom every month to vote on registrations or new action items that might come up. And so the committee meets, we vote on, we make whatever actions that we need to make and approvals. We send that on to the national staff. So if you're a new registration, you may have done it just past our previous month. It might take another 3 weeks before it gets to our committee. And then Carl Reed will then get it on the website once our committee has voted and approved a group to be a COP. So there's a little bit of a delay. It's not instantaneous, but just to let you know, it's just working through a process. We only meet monthly.
If we don't have any more questions from the floor, you can also send any questions you have, like Barbara said, to our respective emails. And this is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube page. If you don't have any more questions, I think we can go ahead and wrap it up.
Great. Thank you for everyone for your questions.
Thank you for your time today, Barbara. We really appreciate it.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.